Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, February 22nd, 2019. Time for another show. Daily Coast Radio is live now. I am reminded, and just in time, too, because Daily Coast Radio is live now. Bill tells me, all the way from Portland, Maine, that Kagro X, that's me. Today, here's what I'm going to do. Wraps up another hellish week in Trump's America by previewing the hellish weekend ahead in Trump's America. That's what we do on Fridays. There's really no choice but to do that on Friday. That's what comes after Friday. The weekend. But we like to try and clean out all the, we like to try and clean out all the stories in Pocket. We clean out about 4 out of the 100 that we've collected over the week. But Friday's a good day to prepare yourself for discussion of sometimes more esoteric topics over the weekend, because all of you, of course, maintain a vigorous social schedule over the weekends, and it being social season down in Mar-a-Lago, you're going to want to be caught up on things. Plenty going on, both here and abroad, and we have our pick of a wide variety of stories today. I don't know if there's any one thing burning up the Twitter wires this morning, but there are several stories over the past couple of days which haven't gotten a chance to come to the fore on the show. Maybe you've been discussing them elsewhere. Maybe not. Maybe they're entirely new to you. But let's open up Pocket, open up our Twitter account here, open up our front page of Daily Coast, and bring you all the latest. And, we'll make our decisions about what constitutes the greatest, along with the latest, to share with you. Let's see. I can tell you what's been burning up my personal Twitter wires. First of all, we'll have a moment of silence in the background. School's open for the first time in several days. Kids completing a rough 2-day school week, Tuesday, Friday. I think they like this schedule. Pretty good. That gives us plenty of time and latitude to talk about we can talk about all the nasty stuff that went on at Mar-a-Lago in years past. But what's personally burning up my Twitter wires today, I should take a look at my stats. Maybe some of you have even seen this thing before. I've shared it before on Twitter, but I was one of those fun Twitter threads where someone suggests or poses a question to followers and everybody shares the question and their personal response to the question. In this case, Catherine Brightbill's question: what is your most on-brand story from your childhood? Lots of great responses to this thread. In fact, 7,000 responses to this thread. And for me, that was to dig up the photo I have stored away here of me about, coming up on 2 years old at my dad's graduation from Rutgers Law School. And I'm there in my very fashionable hand-knitted poncho that everyone was wearing in 1970, holding a balloon at the Rutgers Law School graduation photo. Credit for this one, then Professor Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that's a fun thing to note. She was there at the time and a professor, and I don't know, a lot of people really seem to enjoy this thing, and I wasn't counting on this sort of response, but the thing is sitting there with 762 at the moment likes. Everyone likes the picture. Lots of nice comments, and lots of comments about how interesting and cool that whole thing is. But just a reminder, I didn't do anything. I literally just stood there. Someone gave me a balloon. I didn't knit the poncho. I didn't choose those very interesting, I don't know, what is that sort of maybe houndstooth patterned pants? I wish I had them now, but I don't. They still fit though. If I had them around, I can tell you that. I don't know. I doubt it very much. I was just standing there. doing nothing, minding my own business. Someone took the picture. It happened to have been a person who later became famous. So I don't know how much credit I deserve. I was just there. But thank you for your thoughts. That seems to be what's occupying everybody's mind in my Twitter feed. I'll share the photo with you guys, or at least the tweet with you guys if you are interested in seeing it. If you haven't, because if you haven't already, if you're not one of the 700 and something people out there who have gotten such a kick out of this picture. Anyway, I didn't do that much with it. She went on to greater fame as a Supreme Court justice than as a photographer, but probably could have been a pro if she had had better material to work with. I don't know. Anyway, let's see. Other fun things occupying a lot of space on my Twitter feed, and this may be just idiosyncratic here, but discussion yesterday of a story in the Miami Herald. We've been following the story, and we're kind of we're up to speed on this thing. It's the Jeffrey Epstein situation, and I guess developments in the last day or so have focused on, well, I don't know if did I put this thing away? Yeah, all right. I put it in Pocket. We'll read it from there rather than clicking through on Twitter. The Miami Herald's story updated, 2 hours and 15 minutes ago. So up to speed here. Federal prosecutors, the headline reads, broke law, that's the law, in the Jeffrey Epstein case, judge rules. That's the new news on the case. The conclusion being that the prosecution handled things, A, very badly, B, improperly, and now, C, illegally. That's a big deal. And the Miami Herald's tweet on the subject features a photo of one of those prosecutors who broke the law. The headline doesn't say which prosecutor it is. The picture's supposed to tell you, but in case you didn't know, that's a photo of the man who now serves in Donald Trump's purported cabinet as Secretary of Labor, Alex Acosta. So, and he's among, he was the chief prosecutor. He's the guy they're talking about here. Julie K. Brown writes this one for the Miami Herald. Let's just read it through. Federal prosecutors under former Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta broke the law. That's not what U.S. attorneys are supposed to do. Broke the law when they concealed a plea agreement from more than 30 underage victims who had been sexually abused by wealthy New York hedge fund manager Jeffrey Epstein, a federal judge ruled Thursday. This is, of course, all taking place down in Florida because wealthy New York hedge fund manager Jeffrey Epstein is a Palm Beach neighbor of maybe, possibly, but also probably not, wealthy New York real estate developer Donald Trump, and a member of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago club. Now, there's some contention that Donald Trump actually ejected Epstein from the club and then barred him from visiting the club any further as a result of his predations. But as it turns out, it's highly questionable whether that ever happened. Donald Trump, as you know, isn't one for personal confrontation. Our experience with him is that there's no way in the world that he would ever have agreed to personally confront Epstein about this and throw him out. He may have had a lieutenant of some sort take care of that for him, but it's also entirely possible that he didn't do a goddamn thing about it and made no effort whatsoever to bar him from Mar-a-Lago. I also read a few stories over the week, over the past few days this week, that seemed to hint that Epstein had some special access to Mar-a-Lago, that he enjoyed the use of the club without ever having paid any of the initiation fees, let alone the annual dues. He was just comped to the Mar-a-Lago Club, which seems like an unusual thing to do for somebody so perverted, except, of course, if you are Donald Trump and you actually enjoy that and have a good time. You have a better time at Mar-a-Lago when your good friend, child molester, Jeffrey Epstein is around. And so you comp him at your biggest money-making operation. What a weird decision to make. Anyway, back to the story, which is fully documented. The lawbreaking by former U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, now Trump's Secretary of Labor. While the decision, by the judge in this case, marks a victory for crime victims, the federal judge, Kenneth A. Mara, stopped short of overturning Epstein's plea deal. You'll remember, of course, that he got a sweetheart plea deal from Acosta that basically pled down everything that he was accused of to, well, rather than being accused accurately of sex trafficking in underage girls, he pled to a lesser charge of soliciting prostitution, which, usually involves, typically involves, that's a charge you can add on to a situation like this. But I mean, if you're dealing with adult women who are willingly or otherwise soliciting sex for money, that's the charge for this. This is an entirely different situation. But they decided to plead it down. And we have had discussions on the show in the past of exactly how his sentence was passed, which has been pretty interesting too. Not only did he get 13 months in prison for this really horrific string of crimes, a pattern internationally of abusing children, with the full cooperation of local authorities in some cases, and other powerful, rich and famous and powerful accomplices, it is also alleged. So 13 months for this, but apparently the 13 months was spent in relative luxury in a wing of a city prison or city jail all to himself, with work release, quote unquote work release, where he could go and spend his days in his own office, though he was ankle monitored, not a big imposition for somebody who really should be in federal prison for the rest of his life. Anyway, while the decision marks a victory for crime victims, the federal judge stopped short of overturning Epstein's plea deal or issuing an order resolving the case. He instead gave federal prosecutors 15 days to confer with Epstein's victims and their attorneys to come up with a settlement. The victims did not seek money or damages as part of the suit. They just wanted their day in court. It's not clear whether the victims, now in their late 20s and early 30s, can, as part of the settlement, demand that the government prosecute Epstein, but others are calling on the Justice Department to take a new look at the case in the wake of the judge's ruling. As a legal matter, the non-prosecution agreement entered into by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida, and why would you enter a non-prosecution agreement with a underage sex trafficker? I do not know. But they did. But as a legal matter, this non-prosecution agreement, they say, does not bind other U.S. attorneys in other districts. They are free, if they conclude it is appropriate to do so, to bring criminal actions against Mr. Epstein and his co-conspirators, said lawyer David Boies. Have I ever pronounced his name correctly? That's the famous one, exactly the one you're thinking of, Boies, representing two of Epstein's victims who claim they were trafficked by Epstein in New York and other areas of the country. Should be easy to find another jurisdiction interested in prosecuting him. He flew them around very frequently on his private jet to any number of locations to traffic them. And a lot of big names involved in this too. And by the way, among Epstein's attorneys with whom Acosta was in frequent and sustained and really close contact with in working this whole deal out was Ken Starr, who used to be seriously outraged by sexual impropriety, but of late has come to find himself much more comfortable with it for pay. Earlier this month, The Department of Justice announced it was opening a probe of the case in response to calls from 36 members of Congress. Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse, that sassy guy, the Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Oversight Subcommittee, on Thursday asked the DOJ to reopen Epstein's plea deal. The fact that it's taken this long to get this far is heartbreaking and infuriating, said Sasse. The Department of Justice should use this opportunity to reopen its non-prosecution agreement so that Epstein and anyone else who abused these children are held accountable. It really has been a long time, and the next couple paragraphs illustrate exactly how long it's been. Epstein's lawyer, well, the one who's on record for this paragraph anyway, Martin Weinberg, did not return a call from the Miami Herald. Where's Ken Starr in this? I don't know. It's weird he's left out. Brad Edwards, who represents Courtney Wild, Jane Doe number 1 in the case, I guess we can just say it's Courtney Wild now, said he was elated at the judge's ruling, but admitted he is troubled that it took 11 years to litigate. He blamed federal prosecutors for needlessly dragging it out when they could have remedied their error after it was brought to their attention in 2008. So, the timeline on this is apparently the fault or credit, depending on how you look at it, of federal prosecutors in this. It's just weird that it took this long. And by the way, because it took so long, it's fair to note, and in fact, it is just to note that this is not new information. This is 11 years in the making. 11 years, of course, would cover the period during which Alex Acosta's nomination was considered by the United States Senate. In other words, this case about how the non-prosecution agreement had been mishandled and the victims of the case had been shut out of their opportunity to testify against this serial child trafficker who did at least some of his work, so quote unquote, at the pool deck of Mar-a-Lago, where the president still to this day spends his time. That information was out there and known when they voted. And I don't remember there being a great deal of discussion of that situation in Alex Acosta's nomination process. He got 60 votes for his nomination. Didn't need, 60 votes you're usually used to hearing as the threshold for cloture, but of course cloture on his nomination would have required a bare majority. The actual vote on his nomination, the nomination vote itself, he got 60 votes, which means, yes, some Democrats and independents voted for him. Angus King voted for him among the independents. And off the top of my head, the Democrats whose names stood out when I reviewed the roll call vote the other day, Joe Manchin, to no one's surprise, and Bob Menendez, which honestly is probably explainable by the Florida connection. It may be that they know one another. I don't know if Acosta is, I don't know if the name implies that he may be ethnically Hispanic. I don't know whether he's Cuban, which is always a good bet for the area among the Hispanic population. If he is, maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know, but I'm sure he's not all that happy about having voted for him at this point, and not really as issues and scandals that can crop up go. This is probably not a great one for Menendez to have back on his plate, but there you have it. Anyway, so yeah, they could have fixed this error as early as 2008, and they didn't. The government aligned themselves with Epstein, which is weird because they were the ones supposedly prosecuting Epstein. They aligned themselves with Epstein, working against his victims for 11 years. Brad Edwards, that's the attorney representing Jane Doe number 1 in the case, whose name was mentioned earlier, So, the government aligned themselves with Epstein, working against his victims for 11 years, Edwards said. Yes, this is a huge victory, but to make his victims suffer for 11 years, this should not have happened. Instead of admitting what they did and doing the right thing, they spent 11 years fighting these girls. Now, he didn't even spend 11 years in prison. He spent 13 months in jail. They spent 11 years trying to set that right. Mara, and there's 2 R's in his last name, that's the judge here, in a 33-page opinion, said prosecutors not only violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act by not informing the victims, they also misled the girls into believing that the FBI's sex trafficking case against Epstein was still ongoing, when in fact, prosecutors had secretly closed it after sealing the plea bargain from the public record. So you couldn't even look up what happened to the guy who sexually molested you and trafficked you to others. The decision follows a 3-part series published by the Miami Herald in November. We discussed it. Perversion of Justice was the title of their series, which detailed how federal prosecutors collaborated with Epstein's lawyers to arrange the deal and then hid it from his victims and the public so that no one would know the full scope of Epstein's crimes and who else was involved. And at this point, you're just going to have to, we got to know that. Look at all the names that are involved and it was calculated by Epstein. Of course, he did anything he could to get out of punishment, obviously. But it was calculated. The people that he pulled into his orbit were in part calculated. They were pulled in because he calculated that he would likely be less, or I guess he would be less likely to have his crimes splashed across front pages and headlines across the world. It's just sort of a backwards reasoning, right? Like you might think, if I'm going to involve myself in a string of sex crimes, do I want to do that while placing myself in close proximity to so many famous and powerful world leaders and celebrities, etc.? Will that result in my crimes being splashed across more papers and headlines? Or can I leverage their power to convince prosecutors, once they finally catch up with me, to minimize the splashing of my crimes across headlines and newspapers across the world, across America and around the world, for fear of either incurring the wrath of people whose names will therefore also be besmirched, or for fear of perhaps in some cases losing their jobs or any advancement possibilities because the people being implicated are politically powerful. I'm not certain what his calculations were, but I get the feeling that it was the latter rather than the former. Whereas it might occur to me, let's say in his shoes, 1, no, I shouldn't do this. It's a horrible crime. And 2, it'll only be made worse by the fact that it could be such a salacious story for so many gossip columnists and tabloids around the world. And then, of course, you would realize, oh yeah, the friends I'm doing this with own those tabloids, or at least have arrangements with them such that all those stories could be buried. So maybe your calculation comes out differently than mine. Anyway, let's continue again with the Miami Herald's work on this. That's the more solid. The 66-year-old mogul lured scores of teenage girls from troubled homes, some as young as 13, as part of a cult-like scheme to sexually abuse them by offering them money to give him massages and promising some of them he would send them to college or help them find careers. Just side note, since it's a political show, do you think there's a lot of pressure in the world, in this country, over worries about finding a career or making your way through college, right? No, it's not a big deal, or it's stupid to be offering people free 4-year college or even affordable college. It's not really a big deal. It's a minor point. Nobody's really interested in it. There's a guy out there, when he gets a hold of unlimited funds and is a perv, his big trick, it's not like the old cliched thing you'd see on cheesy made-for-TV movies warning you about sexual predators. Want some candy, little girl? They don't go for candy anymore. Now, you got to offer a bigger prize, I guess, right? College, free college. On the one hand, there's a funding mechanism and policy making, and it ought to be available to everyone without having to get raped in several jurisdictions by dirty old men. On the other hand, the private sector will provide, right? The invisible hand of the market will put its hand up your skirt and give you free college, possibly, if you'll just shut the hell up about me and my powerful friends. You could take care of these things differently. I guess it's a big enough problem if that's something you can do, to say, I'm going to sexually molest you and pass you around to my friends, and you have to remain silent about it for the rest of your life. Wow, what do I get out of it? Free college. It's no small thing. Apparently it works. Well, not very well. I guess people weren't. Maybe he didn't follow through on the deal, and that's why they're talking. But I have a feeling they'd be talking anyway. And quite honestly, if they had a good college education, they would come to the realization that they should own up to these things and say, look, it's not your fault. You were the victim in all this. You should speak out and ruin that guy's life. But I guess it's not working. And I guess Alex Acosta, and by extension, and maybe even more directly, Donald Trump, has an awful lot to do with that. Boy, does he ruin lives wherever he goes. Okay, so that's what he was promising them. Send them to college, help them with their careers. Just to drop a few more fun names in here. Future President Donald Trump, former President Bill Clinton, lawyer Alan Dershowitz, that guy again, Prince Andrew, wow, and other world leaders, scientists and academics were friends with Epstein, who also owns a vast home in Manhattan, a private jet, an island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where he now lives, and much more. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We'll continue with the story in the Miami Herald from yesterday about the judge's ruling in the Epstein case. And really, quite honestly, it's the Acosta case. He's the guy found at fault in this particular inquiry into the larger Epstein case. But with all that money and property at his disposal, he was able to rope in an awful lot of big names, and again, still no mention of Ken Starr and all this. I had forgotten that he was involved in it at all, but Marcy Wheeler didn't, and I'll have to go to her tweets from yesterday to try and dig up the substantiation of that connection. It sounds like Epstein is a guy who should have had his life ruined, but he didn't, and he still has all his money, and he lives in the U.S. Virgin Islands where no one will bother him, and what a terrible existence it must be hanging out down there in the Virgin Islands. And it's almost like he's trolling us at this point that he chooses the Virgin Islands to go to, right? Mara, noting that he reviewed affidavits, depositions, and interrogatories, presumably some of them sealed, showed Epstein worked in concert with others to obtain minors not only for his own sexual gratification, but also for the sexual gratification of others. the judge said. MAGA America, by the way, of course, making certain that everyone understand that Bill Clinton was a friend, that they spent time together, and denying that Donald Trump ever was. And if they acknowledge that they ever crossed paths, it's to point out to us that Donald Trump barred Epstein from Mar-a-Lago. And by the way, I mean, in case I forget to get to that later on, some very good points. And Armando says, don't forget to talk about Ken Starr. I'll try not to, but I have to go and find that material, and I think Marcy's got it. I think we've mentioned it on the show before, and so those of you with good memories may already remember this stuff. But some discussion in the last day or two about the provenance of the story that Trump barred Epstein. The basic storyline of that one is that Epstein approached and this is the crime, he approached a Mar-a-Lago member's teenage daughter, and this member complained to Trump about Epstein, and that was supposedly what triggered the banning. Nobody spoke up for the Mar-a-Lago employees, the towel girls, as they called them on the pool deck at Mar-a-Lago. There wasn't anybody to speak up for them. Nobody got barred from Mar-a-Lago from trafficking in those teenage girls. But a member with money who paid Trump, that got Trump's attention, allegedly. The interesting thing about this is it was largely confined, the reports of his banning Epstein were largely confined to the scandal sheets and not the mainstream newspapers. And recall that, this, as we mentioned, this case has been going on for 11 years. This was back in 2008 that Acosta pulled his particular stunt in this situation. And make no mistake, in case we focus too much on Trump and Epstein and others, or even Ken Starr, says that all of that tells you that we're not spending enough time on Acosta himself. The guy is Secretary of Labor. Do you think he ought to remain? The bottom line is he's been called out by a federal judge for this particularly heinous legal maneuver that compounded the heinous crimes of Epstein and his co-conspirators, and he ought not to be serving in government. Well, impeach him. Bar him from serving in government anymore. He like the others that we've called out on this score with impeachment in the last week or two, seems to be a recidivist when it comes to bad acts as a government officer. We could be rid of him, don't you think? Anyway, yes. So where were we? Instead of prosecuting Epstein under federal sex trafficking laws, Acosta, who was after all a federal attorney, right? He's the U.S. attorney. Why bother using federal law and all this? Acosta instead allowed Epstein to quietly plead guilty in state court to 2 prostitution charges, not really apt charges in this case, and he served just 13 months in the Palm Beach County Jail. The Palm Beach County thing becomes important too, as we've reflected in the past, but let me continue. His accomplices, some of whom have never been identified, were not charged. You might call them, let's say, how would we discuss his accomplices if we are not going to identify them? Like individual one, perhaps, we might say, is one of his accomplices. Epstein's victims were not told that the case was closed until it was too late for them to appear at his sentencing and possibly upend the deal. 2 of them filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida in 2008. It's now 2019, by the way, in case you haven't been paying attention, claiming that prosecutors violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which they did, which grants victims of federal crimes a series of rights, including the ability to confer with prosecutors about a possible plea deal. And no one would be a bigger cheerleader for such a deal, for such a law, than Donald Trump. He's Mr. Law and Order. Why, he thinks criminals should have the book thrown out. They should be executed unless they're non-paying, interestingly enough, non-paying members of his private club. That doesn't sound like Trump at all. He must have been getting paid somehow, but it wasn't with money. What would a wealthy person who is a trafficker in underage teenage girls be able to offer Donald Trump, proprietor of Miss Teen USA pageants and who delights in telling stories of how he would love to walk in on his underage contestants naked and claim owner's prerogative in doing so? What would interest him in palling around with a person sitting on a pile of money who wasn't giving him any of that money? I can't imagine what that might be. Mara said that while prosecutors had the right to resolve the case any way they saw fit, prosecutorial discretion and all that, they violated the law by hiding the agreement from Epstein's victims. Is it entirely clear to everyone what they did there? Basically, they made a plea deal. I'm not going to prosecute you using federal law. You can plead to state charges and you can be in prison for 13 months in the county jail. And you won't even be there for 13 months because you'll get work release every day or 6 days a week or whatever the deal was. But what Acosta did here is settled that case, sealed it, and instead of, according to the law, telling the victims, okay, here's the deal that's being made and you have the right to go to the court that day and speak to the court about the sentencing and see if you can convince the judge to up the sentence or throw out the plea deal or whatever. It doesn't happen very often, but you have that right, except I'm taking it away from you. I'm going to seal the case and I'm not going to notify the victims. And you're not going to find out that you had the opportunity to do something about this sweetheart deal until it's too late. That's his crime here, Acosta's crime. Particularly problematic was the government's decision to conceal the existence of the agreement and mislead the victims to believe that federal prosecution was still a possibility, Mara wrote. When the government gives information to victims, it cannot be misleading. While the government spent untold hours negotiating the terms and implications of the agreement with Epstein's attorneys, untold hours, scant information was shared with the victims, because who cares about them, right? The important people in this case is the rich guy who's been accused of doing this and is guilty and is pleading guilty at that. But we're going to spend all our time pampering that guy. And you know, he probably loves being pampered too. Anyway, I mean, it's enormously frustrating. And I guess another frustrating aspect of this, like with so many stories, it's like, well, the government can't do that. It can't mislead the victims. Okay, what do you mean it can't? Well, it's against the law. Yeah, but okay, so what happens if they do anyway? I don't know. I write a strongly worded letter, I guess. I mean, what happens is the guy who is the perpetrator of the crime walks, and the criminal who arranged for the sweetheart deal gets promoted and becomes Secretary of Labor, and nothing happens. But the thing is, it shouldn't have. It says right here in the law that couldn't happen. So that's why we're mad, because it did. Okay. Nobody goes to jail, nothing like that? Jail, what are you talking about? This is the law. Yeah, I thought you do things that are against the law, you go to jail. Guess not. I mean, Epstein really didn't, so I guess Acosta won't either. Acosta, who was nominated as Labor Secretary in 2017, issued a written statement through a spokesman, this after they note that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami declined to comment. Acosta's spokesman. For more than a decade, the actions of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida in this case have been defended by the Department of Justice in litigation across 3 administrations and several attorneys general. The office's decisions were approved by departmental leadership and followed departmental procedures. This matter remains in litigation, and thus, for any further comment, we refer you to the Department of Justice. That's a non-comment, and an infuriating one at that. It's all good. It's always been approved by departmental leadership. Well, now a federal judge says it never should have been. So, all right, let's haul departmental leadership out for the past 3 administrations. I'm okay with that. Yeah, it'll involve Obama officials. Maybe they even did something wrong. What do I care? Haul them in. Michelle Licata, who was molested by Epstein when she was 14, said the judge's decision was a step for justice. But she still questions why federal authorities have failed to open a new case against Epstein, given that more victims and evidence has, it says, come to light in recent years. They should see if they can prosecute him for something. I mean, really prosecute him, instead of giving him 13 months where he was allowed to come and go as he pleased. I want to see him face some consequences for what he did. I wouldn't mind Acosta facing some either, I would say. Francie Hakes, a former federal prosecutor, I don't know if I've got the name right, said the Crime Victims' Rights Act doesn't spell out any punishment. Oh, that's weird, for violating its terms. So it would set a precedent to reopen Epstein's agreement. That's one of the problems we have with our crimes in this country. Our legal system, or our penal code, doesn't have anything penal in it for, the rich and powerful, or the guys in suits. And it didn't really have that much in there for child molesting sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein either, to be honest. But we don't put that in there because, of course, you won't violate it. You're an officer of the court. You're an officer of the federal government. You're not going to just violate the law. You have a conscience. You would never. You have an obligation. The Constitution, the oath you took to the Constitution obligates you to blah, 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 blah. But what if you don't? What if you just don't? I don't know. Well, cross that bridge when we come to it. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's distasteful to start writing criminal penalties into these things, but I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a mechanism for all this. Can you backdate it? Can you take care of it all at once and pass some sort of omnibus piece of legislation that just says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, you always want to put that in there at the beginning of your draft, any provision of the federal code for which the violation of which carries no explicitly stated criminal penalty shall henceforth subject those convicted of violations under said section to a term in prison no greater than, or no less. Why don't we say no less than 1 year and no greater than 25, except in such cases as extenuating circumstances as applied by the court. Basically, give any court the option to simply impose this catch-all federal prison sentence to anything, any violation of the U.S. code. And, where it's not appropriate, presumably, because we presume these things all the time. We haven't had great luck with that. Presumably, between the judge and any appellate courts that review any sentences handed down, and the various prosecutors who will handle it, and the various advocates for the accused in all of this, it'll work itself out. It'll come out in the wash. And where it doesn't, you take an appeal, right? So, I don't know. These laws all over the books without remedies seem to be a consistent problem for us, or at least we consistently find ourselves forced to point these things out to you here on the show, when we could be discussing happy news, like how many dogs and cats got adopted this weekend or whatever, something more fun like that. Instead, we're mired in the bad news. All right, we continue with the story. There's an awful lot here. Epstein will surely argue he complied with the agreement, relied upon it, and pled guilty under it, so it can't be overturned in fairness to him. This is Francie Hakes continuing and her commenting here. I will be very interested to see what the parties say the remedy for the violation should be. Ultimately, it is simply shocking the government went to the lengths they did to keep the victims in the dark in order to make a serious predator's high-priced defense team happy. Justice should not and does not look like this. There has been no statute of limitations for sex trafficking since 2002, by the way. But have we moved into a new article here? It's strange. I guess there's now a different byline being offered here. All right. Well, at any rate, there's been no statute of limitations for sex trafficking since 2002, but Edwards and other lawyers involved in the case said they tried without success to get federal authorities to investigate whether Epstein's crimes went beyond Palm Beach. Yeah, they did. Manhattan, the Virgin Islands, his private island. Are you telling me that the guy owns a private island in the Virgin Islands and he's a convicted sex trafficker? Barely. But everybody knows he's been flying people from New York to Florida and all this time. And nobody thinks, yeah, I think maybe we can get him in New York and the Virgin Islands. In an op-ed published Sunday in the Herald, Jeffrey H. Sloman, the former first assistant U.S. attorney under Acosta during the Epstein case, defended their decision to give Epstein federal immunity. I'd like to see that linked. It's not linked, but if you read the Herald, go get the Sunday paper. He claimed many of the victims were too frightened to testify against Epstein. Okay, now they're not. He also noted that there were significant legal impediments to prosecuting what was, at heart, a local sex case. Come on. A, everybody knows that there were multiple jurisdictions involved. And B, federal prosecutors love this. How many of them have made names for themselves bringing federal cases against what could have been prosecuted locally or on the state level before? I mean, we're rife with them in this country. For the first time, all of a sudden, guys who wanted to make a name for themselves and advance in the political world are shying away from making the federal cases that their job, and that's their entire job. You're the U.S. attorney. You're supposed to make federal cases. Not this one. Mara suggested otherwise in his decision, saying Epstein and his co-conspirators knowingly traveled in interstate and international commerce to sexually abuse Jane Doe number 1 and number 2 and others, and they committed violations of not only Florida law, but also federal law. So, duh. The bulk of his opinion quoted emails exchanged during the tense negotiations, here we are, between federal prosecutors and Epstein's legal team, which included, and again, big names, Roy Black, doesn't ring a bell for everybody, but those in legal circles, yes. Jack Goldberger, yeah. Alan Dershowitz, again in my show, Dershowitz, you filthy, filthy bastard. All right. Jay Lefkowitz, yes. And former Whitewater and Clinton prosecutor Kenneth Starr, who for the first time, amazingly enough, is somehow just inexplicably preoccupied with keeping a salacious sex story involving Bill Clinton out of the headlines. How could that be? They must pay a lot better in private practice. They do. Then they pay you for being independent counsel. That's weird. Probably pay you pretty well to be a university president, too. But there's the Ken Starr connection, in case you had any doubt about it. Now I don't have to go and dig up Marcy's tweets about it. Those emails suggested ways in which both parties tried to keep Epstein's victims in the dark, he said. The CVRA, Crime Victims' Rights Act, remember, was designed to protect victims' rights and ensure their involvement in the criminal justice process, Mara wrote. However, let's see, Roy Black, Jack Goldberger, Alan Dershowitz, Jay Lefkowitz, and Kenneth Starr apparently worked overtime to make sure that the victims' rights were not protected and that they did not have any involvement in the criminal justice process. That's so strange. What a weird interpretation of the black and white letter of the law. Under the facts of this case, Mara continues, once the government failed to advise the victims about its intention to enter into the non-prosecution agreement, a violation of the CVRA occurred, open and shut. Victims' advocates applauded the judge's decision. This is a tremendous victory for crime victims and the rule of law, which is a great thing, I hear. The court made clear that the statute was enacted to make crime victims full participants in the criminal justice system, said Jeff R. Dion, executive director of the Zero Abuse Project. And when the government gives information to victims, it cannot be misleading, The government's conduct was a clear violation of the CVRA, and the court must now consider a remedy. And that's the end of the article. Do you think they ought to be considering a remedy? Should the remedy include calling out Acosta, impeaching Acosta, calling for his resignation? What do we think it ought to be? Michael Musson says, well, clearly Epstein is the victim in all this, so he'll need a presidential pardon. So we can contact the pardon attorney on his behalf, or maybe Ken Starr can help out with that. Yeah. So pretty amazing. Bill points us to the tweet, or at least the conclusion of a tweet thread by Glenn Kirshner. Glenn Kirshner, an NBC News and MSNBC legal analyst, former 30-year federal prosecutor, as he points out in his Twitter bio, and summarizes the whole thing thus. A judge just ruled that Trump's current labor secretary, Alexander Acosta, violated the law by giving a sweetheart non-prosecution deal to serial sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and hid the deal from many young female victims Epstein assaulted/abused. Every federal prosecutor knows that under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, it's required that victims be consulted about any proposed plea agreement. And if you think about it for just a second, again, I don't mean to stretch this whole thing out, but the thoughts that occur to me at a point like this is, why do we have something like this? Why would we have a CVRA, the Crime Victims' Rights Act? And of course, the reason we've got it is because in the past, you'd have situations like this, and people would say, you didn't even consult me. You don't think that I, as the victim of this crime, should have been informed that you were letting this guy off the hook, that I shouldn't have had an opportunity to address the court to discuss this plea deal? I don't get anything to say. You know, the perpetrator and you get to cut this deal, and the person who was the victim of the crime has nothing to say about it. And that strikes law and order conservatives, and quite honestly, quite a few progressives, I'm sure, no doubt, when we're discussing things like crimes against children and sex crimes, and any number of crimes, really. But certainly law and order Republican types, conservative types, would say, yeah, this is an outrage. There ought to be a crime victims' Bill of Rights. Why, these poor angel moms who lost their kids to the illegal immigrants, as they like to point out, or, whatever. Whenever they have victims they think are sympathetic, they think it's an outrage that such a thing could possibly happen. So we're going to pass a crime victims' Bill of Rights. We're going to have a rights bill for these guys, and the victims should be able to come into court and speak up. And we want retribution to be a part of who supports these sorts of things. And then, voila, it turns out, not really all that important. The guy's got a lot of money. I like a lot of money. He's giving me some of that money. He's giving me some of the girls, whatever it is. I think I can get Mr. Trump to like me, and maybe I'll get a job. I think I could move up in the ranks if I help this one or that one. And so, there you go. But that's why you have it. Because somebody complained, rightly, that they weren't correctly considered in the criminal justice system, and members of Congress agreed and said, this is an outrage, and we're going to make a big splashy headline, and we're going to be the ones that fix things for the victims. Well, it's going to be left back on your plate, Congress. I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, somebody who currently serves at a high level in this government, by your leave, doesn't think you were serious about that. Doesn't think Congress really, they didn't really mean it. If they really meant it, they would have put some penalties in the law. So screw it, we'll just violate it. And now I ask you, should this person, but I did ask you a couple months ago, do you think this person should be Secretary of Labor? And you said yes. So, maybe you won't impeach him. I don't know. 60% of the body that really counts, bottom line, when it comes to impeachment, said not only are we not going to impeach him, and we knew about this. This is an ongoing case. It's been in litigation for 11 years. Just the bad part of it has been in litigation for 11 years. The part that involves Acosta, on whose nomination we're voting, has been in the public and been litigated for 11 years. In the meantime, we don't know that he really did anything wrong. We'll probably never find out, except in the next year or so. But in the meantime, go for it. Be Secretary of Labor. And why Secretary of Labor? I don't know. I mean, I think I looked up once, and there was something in Acosta's background that suggested that he might actually be a relatively decent selection for labor, that he had some experience in it. But it is interesting, like, to have picked him out of nowhere. When the pick was made, I don't remember any labor types saying, oh yeah, Acosta, I should have thought of that. Instead, mostly people were saying, who? What? Well, he was a U.S. attorney. Well, that's something. That's politically involved, politically connected. What was it? In the Bush administration, maybe that he had done something. Let's see. Acosta served in 4 presidentially appointed U.S. Senate confirmed positions in the Bush administration. From December 2001 to 2002, Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division. So he hadn't yet pulled this stunt on Epstein. From December 2002 to August 2003, he was a member of the National Labor Relations Board, for which he participated in or authored more than 125 opinions. So that was it, where we said, okay, that's labor background. And in all likelihood, Donald Trump really literally just knew nobody with any sort of labor background. It doesn't dirty his hands and dumb stuff like that. So maybe that was what recommended him. By the way, when he was, what did we say? He was a principal deputy assistant attorney general in the Civil Rights Division. When he was later that was a long time later. All right, we'll have to wait for after the break probably to bring this one up. But I note that, he became Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in August of 2003, where he was, this is interesting, where he was known for increasing federal prosecutions against human trafficking. Isn't that interesting? I didn't realize that was even the case. Now, there's more that's interesting about his having occupied that position, but that's a new one. So interesting that he's now got himself in trouble for minimizing human trafficking prosecutions. Weird. He's all over that. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. In the middle of having to send out this particular tweet now that I have happened upon this piece of the Alexander Acosta Wikipedia profile. And hey, who knows? Maybe Wikipedia is it's getting cooked up. You can't really necessarily trust it every single time, but I don't know. We'll have to look and see what the editing history is on this. But again, it points me right here, interestingly enough, to it's all footnoted, right? He became Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Division on August 22nd, 2003, where he was known for increasing federal prosecutions against human trafficking. And there's a footnote, and it leads us to a Miami Herald story by Amy Driscoll. Sounds familiar, actually. February 16th, 2017, of course, in the middle of his nomination. And so if you were wondering, like, how could the Senate have ignored this? Well, if they dug into it, they would have found something serious and concerning. But if they didn't dig into it, they would have found in the front page or wherever in the Miami Herald this story under the headline, "A Passion of Trump's New Labor Secretary Pick. Trafficking is evil. It is hideous." That is the headline of the February 16th, 2017 story in the Miami Herald. So if all you're doing is skimming the headlines, Trump's new labor secretary, is a former federal prosecutor, and we love federal prosecutors because we hate crime and stuff like that. And 2, he actually has some labor relations board experience, considerable labor relations board experience. So what the hell? And 3, he is a tough prosecutor. He hates sex trafficking, and I hate sex trafficking. I mean, that's why I hire other people to do the trafficking for me when I need an underage girl to have sex with, say, most senators, I guess. I don't know. Apparently, it's a thing that people must say to themselves, or else this wouldn't have happened, right? So, you get a headline that says, oh, he's against that. It says in fact, it's his passion is prosecuting sex traffickers, except for when he doesn't prosecute them, because then his passion is not doing that. That is some passion he's got. So here's the story from the archive. It says, here's, I don't know, what is this up here? This italicized and bold thing. Is this something they added, updated? Yeah, all right. Well, that was back in 2017 from the archive. Alexander Acosta, the FIU, Florida International University law dean, and the former U.S. attorney from Miami, was tapped Thursday to lead the U.S. Labor Department. Here is a June 2004 story from the Miami Herald archives about Acosta when he led the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division and targeted human trafficking. So, this 2017 story that they ran during the nominations process so that senators would see what a fine fellow he is actually a reprint of a 2004 story from before he pulled this stunt with Epstein. And interestingly, then, so the Miami Herald chose in 2017 to run the story from 2004 when he was a passionate advocate for federal prosecution of sex trafficking, and not the story anywhere between 2008 and 2000, well, and that current moment of 11 years now, although then it would only have been 9 years of litigation over whether or not he, in fact, did entirely the opposite, and B, broke the law to do it. I went out of my way to break the law so that I wouldn't have to federally prosecute sex traffickers if they were important dudes who could help me out. So in 2004, this is what they thought about him. When Alex Acosta talks about the Justice Department's battle against modern-day slavery, the passion in his voice comes from one stark image in his memory. And this is interesting, too, given where we are today. It's a photograph he saw a few years ago of a tiny room where a 14-year-old Mexican girl, well, that's not so popular anymore, is it? Was held captive. Just 3 walls, a curtain, and a twin bed. And it's a grim scene, obviously. I'm not belittling the scene. I'm belittling Acosta's dedication to prosecuting the situation. This one, Mexicans involved. Yeah, that's trafficking. We can take care of that one. We're going to federally prosecute the crap out of that one. White guy? Really? How much money does he have? I'm thinking about running for blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, maybe that one's not a crime so much. In fact, maybe the girls who were raped shouldn't even know that we don't think it's a crime. That's, yeah, do what you can to make sure they never find out. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, look, I don't need to tell you the story of this girl in particular who was trafficked. I mean, I will, because I guess, well, one, it's part of the story, and two, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong here, but her story should be told. I mean, the Miami Herald thought so. So now I'll do it. The girl slept there, lived there, and was forced to have sex there with man after man, up to 30 a day, he said. There was only one personal item in the room, a teddy bear, the last remnant of her lost childhood. This is human trafficking, he said, punctuating each word. That's why I did it. As he announced a new anti-slavery, interestingly enough, anti-slavery initiative last week in Tampa. And by the way, if you ask Epstein's girlfriend and co-trafficker, whatever her name, Ghislaine, was that her first name? Maxwell. What was the situation that, how did they view themselves who were in his circle and helping him find these girls? They viewed themselves as voluntary sex slaves. So slavery is not the wrong word here. Anyway, so this is the way he was presenting a new anti-slavery initiative last week, back in 2004, in Tampa. It is evil. It is hideous. It is one of the most horrendous crimes of our society. But screw it. You get to go. 13 months in the county jail, day release every day for you. And where do you want to go? Your own office? Cool. No problem. Last August, Acosta became, and here's some answer to some of our questions from earlier, Acosta became the first Hispanic, yes, to lead the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. The Cuban American from Miami, there's our answer on Menendez. Quite honestly, I mean, I don't know. Does anybody mind if I bash him just a little bit here? I don't think we have any huge Menendez fans here. But personally, whatever. I worked there, full disclosure. But that's how I can tell you, at least in the early days, and I guess still now, nothing captivated Bob Menendez's attention more than a Cuban connection for a story. There are a lot of things he cares about. There's a lot of things he doesn't care about. There's a lot of things he knows he should care about. My experience in his office was, even when I latched on to a very serious issue that had tremendous potential, not only for doing right, but also for making him known for doing that right and fighting the Republicans when they needed to be fought. This was during the first couple years of the Gingrich majority in the House. Even when I latched on to a story that I really thought he should be pursuing, an issue that I thought he should be pursuing legislatively in Congress, you couldn't get him interested until you found a Cuba angle to make it work. I think I've told the story before, but to try my best to make a long story short, when we were fighting against the Istook Amendment way back when, in 95 or so, I guess, Istook was looking to, that was the first of the defund the left ideas among new Republicans. The idea was to prohibit federal grantees from lobbying, essentially. The idea being, the theory was that they were using their grant money to lobby for yet more grant money, and blah, 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 deficit, federal debt, got to tamp down on things. And that was his approach to it. But really, he wanted to to defund public advocacy groups that were working on the left, and those were chiefly federal grantees in many cases. But this Istook Amendment, also, I mean, the Istook Amendment exempted certain other groups, including those that had tax-exempt status. At the time, advocacy groups on the left were very often funded through federal grant-making programs, whereas advocacy groups on the right were incorporated as nonprofits, sometimes as a sham. And they, a nonprofit shouldn't be doing any lobbying, but they would register both a 501c3 and a 501c4 and pretend that the C4 was doing all the lobbying, even though all the money was going into the C3, et cetera, et cetera. And the great irony of all that was that Istook's amendment, the logic rested on the fungibility of money, and that if you were getting a federal grant, that would free up other resources for you to use for lobbying. Even if you didn't use the grant money for lobbying, it didn't matter because money was fungible. Well, if money is being poured into your 501c3 arm and you're using it in your C4 arm to lobby, then that doesn't matter either. Or even worse, if you were incorporated as a 501H, as I recall, and you could do unlimited lobbying. You didn't even have to watch your budget like you do with a C4. Anyway, the point there was that Republican groups were not being targeted, even under the same logic, that they were using to target Democratic-leaning groups. And I couldn't get Menendez interested in that until I pointed out to him, well, one of the groups that's a federal grantee that would be impacted by this would be Hermanos al Rescate, the Cuban exile group that, quite laudably really, flew their small planes over the Straits of Florida looking for people who were trying to escape Cuba on rafts or ramshackle boats who were in danger, and they would alert the Coast Guard to their presence. And in those days, the Coast Guard, I guess, wasn't full of terrorists, so they would respond, and they still are mostly not full of terrorists. They still do respond. I know, but I'm making a reference to another story that we've been ignoring so far. And they would go out and they would pick up these refugees and bring them to safety. And hey, automatic green cards in the United States as well. Isn't that an amazing thing for Hispanic folks to be able to receive? Well, whatever. Anyway, no walls in Florida, apparently. Anyhow, they were at the time voting heavily Republican. Have I mentioned that? I guess I probably didn't bring that up. Oh well. Anyway, now I have. But once he found out that Hermanos al Rescate might have their funding threatened, he was interested, and he picked up the phone and he called his good friend, fellow Cuban-American but Republican of Florida, Lincoln Diaz-Balart, and said, "Lincoln, we got a problem. You know, this Istuk Amendment. It's got to be stopped." And lo and behold, he had an ally in Lincoln Diaz-Balart instantly as well. Okay, it was an issue for him. It's a personal thing. It's an approach, and I learned how to manage it. So anyway, complaint over. But there's the answer. He's Cuban American, and that, I guess, probably has as much, if not the entire explanation for why Bob Menendez would vote to confirm Alex Acosta as Department of Labor Secretary. Though I would imagine now he's picking up the paper and saying, God damn it. Well, if we impeach him, I'm voting for impeachment. So who knows? I'm just guessing. Anyway, the Cuban American from Miami who entered Harvard University at age 17. He's a smart guy, so he knew exactly what he was doing when he was covering up Epstein's crimes, is now the point man in the governor's drive to halt trafficking, for some people, of an estimated 15,000 people a year into the United States for slavery. But if you started out in the United States because you're white and your enslaver is white, can't help you. Unless you're the enslaver, in which case I would like to help you. Please give me a call. Well, the rest of it is laudatory, and I'm sure he prosecuted lots of people. It says here, let's see, in our various section headers in this article, amazing voice. He's been an amazing voice for this issue. That was Angela Arboleda, civil rights policy analyst at the National Council of La Raza. Moving down here, there's Great Instincts. He's not just a political appointee, but he is also a Republican insider with great instincts on some of these issues that our immigrant communities have been affected by, said James Sogbie, president of the Arab American Institute and a Democrat. He's made a real effort to reach out and help. Well, that is interesting. What else have we got here? Oh, is his name not really Alex Acosta? He's Rene Alexander Acosta? Okay, well, I would go by Alex too. Why not? Anything else that we can pull out of this quickly without spending too much time getting bogged down on this particular report in this section of the story? Stamped for success is the last bit. Was he always stamped for success? Yes, completely. Well, that's the answer then. That, according to, well, who is this? Cruz Alvarez, childhood friend Ann Cruz Alvarez, who in a previous section recalled that in high school he would quote passages from Latin texts and keep an extensive insect collection, which he studied. He wasn't quite a straight A student, but he did skip his senior year at Gulliver when Harvard accepted him early. How nice. Let's see. His division's work combating human trafficking is already showing results. It sure is. The office has 163 open investigations, more than twice the number open in January of 2001, a statistic he cites proudly. One of those, I don't know if it was open yet, one of those he dropped the ball on. Sorry about that. So was he always stamped for success? Yes, completely. We knew he was going to do something. We just weren't sure what it would be. And now we know it was arranged for the light sentence of human trafficker and known perv and Mar-a-Lago member Jeffrey Epstein. What a strange combination of events. Anyway, I just thought I would add that one. Let me go back. Now we have to trace our steps back to where we were. It was reading through Acosta's Wikipedia bio, Wikipedia entry, so that we understood, one, that it was his prior service on the National Labor Relations Board that made him a decent choice for labor secretary, but his sweetheart deal for serial child molester Jeffrey Epstein that actually made him a terrible choice for anything, including forgiveness of any kind or membership in the greater human race. So we'll see if we can work out that dichotomy. By the way, let's see, reading his brief bio backwards of offices that he has occupied, in addition to Secretary of Labor. Prior to that was Dean of the Florida International University College of Law, where he told everybody, I'm sure, about the importance of the rule of law for most people, except me. Prior to that, United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, which is where he flubbed this case / fixed this case, depending on how you view it. And before that, United States Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division, that a job he held for a couple of years from August of 2003 to June of 2005. Interestingly, in that particular situation, he was the successor to Bradley Schlossman, who was, of course, one of the more infamous voter suppression operatives in the George W. Bush administration. And when he was no longer tenable as, at that time, acting United States Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Division, they plugged in Alex Acosta in his place, and he turns out to be no more acceptable than Schlossman ever was. So that's very interesting. Just going to point that out. Let's see. Is there any other interesting Bush administration notable achievements in here that we should look at? There was the big deal of human trafficking that he hated so much, except when he didn't. He authorized federal intervention in an Oklahoma religious liberties case to help assure the right to wear hijab in public school. How do you like that? That's counterintuitive, and I wonder whether he would still do it. And worked with Mississippi authorities to reopen the investigation of the 1955 death of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black youth whose abduction and killing helped spark the civil rights movement. So there's some good on his record. He's not a total scumbag, but he really has done himself a great disservice with this particular case that we're discussing today. While leading the Civil Rights Division, Acosta allowed his predecessor, Bradley Schlossman, to continue making decisions on hiring. Did you know that? Maybe we should read that article. A report by the Inspector General of the Office of Professional Responsibility later found that Schlossman illegally gave preferential treatment to conservatives and made false statements to the Senate Judiciary Committee. That sounds bad. Those findings were relayed to the Office of the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, but Schlossman was not prosecuted. You know how it goes with those false statements or perjury or contempt of Congress in front of committees like that. They get referred to the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, but if the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia is on your team, you won't be prosecuted, and neither was Schlossman. While it put the primary responsibility on Schlossman, the report also concluded that Acosta, quote, did not sufficiently supervise Schlossman, and that in light of indications he and Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General Sheldon Bradshaw had about Schlossman's conduct and judgment, they failed to ensure that Schlossman's hiring and personnel decisions were based on proper considerations. Could be some willful blindness in that. In 2005, Acosta was appointed United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, whereupon, he began serving where his office prosecuted the lobbyist Jack Abramoff, the terrorism suspect Jose Padilla, the founders of the Cali cartel, and Charles MacArthur Emanuel, the son of Liberia's former leader. So, that's, one white guy, one Hispanic guy, a bunch of more Hispanic guys, and a black guy. Okay. Well, not bad. The district also targeted white-collar crime, prosecuting several bank-related cases, including one against Swiss bank UBS. The case resulted in $780 million in fines, and for the first time in history, the bank provided the United States with the names of individuals who were using secret Swiss bank accounts to avoid U.S. taxes, and would point everybody move to the Caribbean. Other notable cases during his tenure include the corruption prosecution of Palm Beach County Commissioner Chairman Tony Masalotti, Palm Beach County Commissioner Warren Newell, Palm Beach County Commissioner Mary McCarty, and Broward Sheriff Ken Jenny. The conviction of Cali cartel founders Miguel and Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela, I don't remember them, but okay, for the importation of 200,000 kilos of cocaine, which resulted in a $2.1 billion forfeiture, and the white-collar crime prosecutions of executives connected to Hamilton Bank. Acosta also emphasized healthcare fraud prosecutions. How did that go? Did he prosecute anybody who later became governor of Florida despite healthcare fraud prosecutions? I don't know. Under Acosta's leadership, the district prosecuted more than 700 individuals. Would have been 701 if he'd gotten around to Epstein. Responsible for a total of more than $2 billion in that's just Medicaid fraud. Then a whole section on the Jeffrey Epstein non-prosecution agreement. Won't read through that one, assuming we got most of the salient details there. But I am somewhat interested in finding out where... interesting. Here in February of 2017, also about the same time that the Miami Herald chose to rerun the 2004 article lauding Acosta for being tough on sex trafficking, Adam Serwer, writing in The Atlantic, has this headline: "The scandal that may haunt the new nominee for Labor Secretary." And you know what? It wasn't sex trafficking or the lack of prosecution. R. Alexander Acosta, it says here, was the head of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice in the Bush administration when subordinates skirted civil service laws and engaged in politicized hiring. Wow. Well, that is a serious violation, but a totally different one. And, and a reminder here that Acosta wasn't even the first choice for a labor secretary. Trump's pick followed the withdrawal of, remember, Andrew Puzder's nomination? Well, anyway, Serwer goes on to note that, note exactly what we said. That period, all hell broke loose in the Civil Rights Division, said William Yeomans, a professor of law at American University and former deputy section chief in the division under Acosta. That was all under Acosta. He presided over the politicization of the Civil Rights Division. It's a bad thing to do. At the time of his nomination to run the Civil Rights Division, Acosta had substantial bipartisan support. He was approved by voice vote in the Senate and had the backing of Latino rights groups like La Raza, for instance. Acosta is of Cuban descent and would be the first Hispanic American in Trump's cabinet, but at the Justice Department, his subordinates skirted the law, seeking to purge liberal attorneys from the division and replace them with conservatives who didn't believe in the mission of the division. You see, Acosta told investigators he was unaware of what was occurring. Wah, wah. Oh, well. Man, so there's a lot, and should we dig into some of this? According to a 2008 joint report from the Department of Justice Inspector General and Office of Professional Responsibility, in 2003, while leading the division, Acosta delegated hiring authority to a subordinate, Sheldon Bradshaw, who in turn placed Bradley Schlossman in charge of hiring decisions for the division. The report concluded that Schlossman had broken civil service laws by considering political affiliation in hiring, and that he had lied to the Senate Judiciary Committee about his activities. He was never prosecuted. The report states that Schlossman used terms like real Americans, right thinking, solid, and on the team to describe conservative attorneys, the ones he wanted to hire, and that Bradshaw was aware of the meaning of those terms. Well, no doubt about that. Schlossman, deploying a colorful metaphor, stated in an email that my tentative plans are to gerrymander all of those crazy libs right out of the voting section. Isn't that precious. Well, okay, and he succeeded in doing it and getting away with it, too. And he's still kicking around out there, too. I don't remember what he's been up to lately, but maybe we can use the break to research that, because his name has bubbled up once again in the last couple of weeks. Let's see. Anything else that we can sneak in the next 30 seconds from out of this article? I think you get the gist of it. I don't know, man. There's no reason Acosta should be able to survive this, but of course, it's part of the Trump administration, so I make no bets on whether he faces any music whatsoever on this. But seems to be a bit of a problem, seems to be a bit of a recidivist, should probably get rid of the guy. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. This isn't how I envisioned my Friday going, but you know how it is. We got to dig into these things. There's not very many other places where you have the flexibility to do this all in one sitting, so we ought to take advantage of it. I know there are some other stories I wanted to get to, but for the time being, I am stuck on this one. Brad Schlossman has been in the news relatively recently, and what I was able to find immediately during the break, this Talking Points memo piece here, is this, it doesn't byline it. Does that mean it's taken from somebody else, or is it, oh, okay, here we are. This article is written by John Light from Talking Points memo. I'm looking at it, I see. That's why it's presented oddly. On the MSN, not MSNBC, but MSN.com site. That accounts for the weird formatting here. But let me get to the substance of it. The Return of Bradley Schlossman is the name of the article. I had to grab that one. That's what I was looking for, after all. Among the myriad voting rights disputes we've been following in the run-up to Election Day, that would have been the 2018 midterm elections, is one in Dodge City, Kansas. Nothing good happens there, I don't think. Where a county clerk moved the city's only polling site to a facility outside city limits. Does this ring a bell for you? It does for me. I don't know if we talked about it on the show, but it seemed like a big story at the time. And, by the way, more than a mile from a bus stop, so there would really only be one way you could get there. Did you have a car? The move is seen by civil rights advocates as likely to disenfranchise poor voters who lack transportation or flexible schedules, including thousands of Hispanic immigrants, about whom Alexander Acosta no doubt cares deeply, who have moved to the region to work in meatpacking plants and now make up the majority of the city's population. Maybe good things do happen there. Taco trucks. I don't know whether they have taco trucks. They might not be taco folks. I don't know where they're from, but the meat is undoubtedly delicious. I guess that goes in. I don't know. But anyway, I was thinking more along the lines of Wild West Dodge City, Kansas, and that's a while in the past. Anyway, where are we here? This is like some weird formatting. Again, it's not AMP, but it makes me think that I might be better off looking for this article in the original formatting at Talking Points memo so that I can be sure about, this is a problem. It's in the Prime section, so I won't be able to get to it. So, where was I? There's the Hispanic immigrants who have moved to the city to work in meat packing plants now make up a majority of the city's population. The ACLU sued over this move, by the way. The next text says, defending Ford County Clerk Deborah Cox in court, a longtime TPM character, Bradley Schlossman. Okay, so I was afraid that was sort of like, supposed to be a sidebar link to another article, but that isn't. That's actual text of the thing. So, long story of this last paragraph, shortened a little bit. When Dodge City, Kansas moved its sole polling site outside of city limits more than a mile from a bus stop in order to hopefully disenfranchise the majority of the city's voting population, or at least population. The person who came to court to defend that decision on behalf of the county clerk was Bradley Schlossman, who you know a little bit about now. Schlossman first showed up on TPM's radar when he served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General and Acting Assistant Attorney General in the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division under George W. Bush, and was at the center of a politically motivated hiring scandal. As Rick Perlstein and Livia Gershon describe, Schlossman declared he wanted to replace the mold spores, commies, and crazy libs in the division's voting section. Of course, those were the people who worked in the voting section because those are the people who care about voting rights. Those are the people who will apply for those jobs. They're interested in actually expanding voting rights for people and protecting them. Conservatives at first avoided those jobs, and then they realized, why don't we pack the division full of conservatives, and then there won't be any more problems because we'll just dismiss all the cases. So that was the plan. So he wanted to remove the mold spores, commies, and crazy libs from the division's voting section and went on a hiring spree. So, along with Hans von Spakovsky, you've heard that name before, Schlossman made sure the department did not oppose voter ID laws and other efforts that civil rights advocates say disenfranchise minority voters. Schlossman later became interim U.S. Attorney in Kansas City after Attorney General Alberto Gonzales dismissed Todd Graves for not appearing sufficiently loyal to the DOJ's fixation on rooting out, quote, voter fraud, which doesn't exist. Part of what would become the U.S. Attorney's firing scandal that TPM helped uncover. The DOJ's Inspector General report later found that Schlossman politicized hiring broke the law. Schlossman's politicized hiring. The IG also found that Schlossman, quote, made false statements about whether he considered political and ideological affiliations when he gave sworn testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee, but Schlossman never faced charges, as you know. Schlossman now practices law in Kansas and is an ally, you'll never believe it, of Kansas Secretary of State and former head of Trump's disbanded Election Integrity Commission, Chris Kobach. So, too, is his new client, Ford County Clerk Deborah Cox, who at least once forwarded an ACLU request to her boss, Kobach, with the message, LOL. Read more of TPM's decade-plus coverage of Schlossman's doings here. Links to the story Schlossman Leaves Justice Department from 2007, Why No Charges for Schlossman in 2009, and Figure from Bush DOJ Scandal Helps Kobach with Kansas Senate Lawsuit in 2014. Interesting. By the way, I'm curious about what was their explanation. Anything juicy in the piece, Why No Charges for Schlossman? That was Zachary Roth's piece back in 2009. Given that the DOJ Inspector General's report found that Schlossman broke the law in making politicized hiring decisions and lied to Congress about it, why and how did the U.S. Attorney's Office make the decision to decline to bring criminal charges? Get a bit more information on that question from Patricia Riley, Special Counsel to the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, which conducted the investigation. Riley told TPM Muckraker that her office was only asked by the Inspector General's office to look into the possible perjury charges stemming from Schlossman's congressional testimony rather than the underlying hiring decisions. She said that 6 career prosecutors with between 10 and 21 years of experience conducted the investigation, reporting to Assistant U.S. Attorney Channing Phillips. U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Taylor had recused himself from the probe. Channing Phillips' name is familiar too. Did he end up as she? I don't even know. End up in the Trump administration, like possibly being one of the when they were shuffling people around, moving Yates out and Rosenstein in. Did Channing Phillips' name come up? I can't recall. Anyway, the investigation continued until last Friday, said Riley, and included interviews with witnesses who were not contacted by the IG's report. Based on that investigation, a decision was made not to bring criminal charges. That explains nothing. It just says that they did it. Why did you do that? Well, we talked to a lot of people and then we decided to do it. Oh, okay. Thank you. Riley declined to say what specific information uncovered in that probe determined the decision. We also asked the office of Senator Pat Leahy when they first learned that the OIG report had found that Schlossman lied to the committee. Spokeswoman responded in an email, "We received this IG report this morning, shortly in advance of the hearing, as is the usual practice of the IG's office." So that's a non-statement too. Wow, that's awfully disappointing. I mean, I guess it isn't really Zach Roth's fault that no one was commenting. But in 10 years, there's been no follow-up. So too bad. I'll tell you what happened there. The U.S. Attorney's Office played ball with the George W. Bush administration's Department of Justice and said, the hell with it. We're not doing that. It's exactly what I told you was happening in the George W. Bush administration from beginning to end. And this was the very end of January 13th, 2009, their final act. All right. Very interesting. We've been all over the map on this one. Greg has sent me another article. We're definitely not going to be able to expend a considerable amount of time on it, but he's been sending me a number of articles that have been of some interest that I guess help fill in the blanks on the chronology of the Netanyahu story that he brought to our attention the other day, which seems to put the chronology pretty squarely in the Netanyahu is the first mover category. He is the one. He finalized his alliance with the far right racist groups, and there's even more information on that. Maybe I'll share that with you quickly. But that the reaction from the rest of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, to organize against him was motivated chiefly by his first move to ally with Otzma Yehudit, which means Jewish power. And it says here in Nicholas Grossman's tweet that if it reminds you of white power in the U.S., you are not wrong. I'll read you the whole tweet here. Netanyahu forced a choice. That's how we know he was the first mover here. He cut this deal with Otzma Yehudit. And as he says, if that reminds you of white power, you're not wrong. And it descends, Otzma Yehudit, from a movement that the U.S., the European Union, and Israel have labeled terrorists. So that's weird because Netanyahu allying with terrorists, and he's not supposed to be, and everyone who likes Netanyahu supposedly likes him because he's so tough on the terrorists until he allies with them. Oh, our terrorists. So that's different. I get the point. And we have that problem here too, even in differentiating between our own terrorists. A point that I would like to have made more in depth, but that I would like to have you armed with over the weekend. Did I put this tweet away? I know I'm jumping all over the place at these last couple minutes here. Who said this so that I can credit it properly? Looking through this, but this is the one. There we are. I got you. Hold on a second. I'm only wasting a few seconds to get this right. Faiza Patel on Twitter here, a verified personage on Twitter, co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center. Brennan Center does pop up quite a bit for us. Well, we pay attention to such things. Faiza Patel making this excellent point about the still developing story of our lunatic Coast Guardsman turned terrorist. He is most frequently referred to as a domestic terrorist, which people were happy to see applied to him because they are terrorists and you should call them out as such, and that's fine. And domestic terrorist, well, he's an American citizen. And his intention was to act here. And so Americans would consider him domestic in that sense. But Faiza makes, or shall we say, Ms. Patel makes an excellent point here. The international nature of far-right violent movements is well known, but the FBI treats them as domestic. And I understand the inclination to do so. And it's sometimes, I think, it's even more shocking if we call them domestic terrorists. But she makes a great point here. The international nature of far-right violent movements is well known. She then goes on to say, I'm glad that the Washington Post makes this point. She includes a link and then a screen capture of what she's talking about. International terrorism, of course, as she says, is reserved for Muslims. I see. And you got a great point. And here's the Washington Post's point about the international nature of far-right violent movements. The inspiration that, what's his name, the crazy Coast Guardsman, and I don't think his name is in here, and that's fine. Why repeat it? The inspiration that he drew from Anders Breivik, remember Greg told us that was the case, illuminates the global exchange of extremist ideas binding, apparently, lone wolf actors who portray themselves as martyrs for Western civilization, and that in scare quotes, under siege, they claim, by immigrants and elite opinion makers espousing multiculturalism. And the guy who shot up the church in Charleston made similar claims and claimed similar affiliations. For some reason, in this clip from the Washington Post, and I should probably even just take a look at the whole article, not necessarily on the air, but I want to have that available for digestion. It's interesting. For some reason, they say in this section, the inspiration he drew from Breivik, 40, illuminates the global exchange of extremist ideas. The important point here is that the inspiration was drawn from Anders Breivik. The fact that Anders Breivik is currently 40 years old, I mean, can't we drop that from newspaper convention? Like at some point, I don't know. Does it really make a difference? I'm not sure why they inserted that. It is so out of place as to be absurd. But okay. Maybe in greater context, it makes more sense. I don't know. In this screen capture, it makes none. So, again, he's inspired. And you ask, where was he radicalized? Who is his sheikh, we might ask, if he were an international Muslim terrorist? He's been influenced by ISIS newsletters online, right? Now, he's reading Anders Breivik, who's not American. He's not domestic. And I like this point, too. Apparently lone wolf actors, but they all claim the same motivation. Western civilization under siege, blah, blah, blah. How curious it is that they all seem to believe exactly the same thing and correspond with one another in email internationally. This is an international network. If it were Muslims, the fact that the network is nebulous, far-flung, and mostly the construct of our own minds doesn't seem to make a difference. But when it's white people, well, they're all lone wolves, whatever. Or even if we're able to call them terrorists, well, they're domestic terrorists. There's no international aspect to their activity, which somehow makes it worse, right? Well, domestic terrorism, that's bad, but that's a different kind of terrorism than international terrorism, which, prompts music like this to be played. Whereas, domestic terrorism is more of a womp-womp kind of a thing, I guess. There's more to the screen cap, though. The European, allegedly emulated by the American extremist, has quoted generously from American figures such as Robert Spencer, the director of the Jihad Watch website, and had modeled his act on the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, whose perpetrator is now a hero to some on the far-right fringes. The recycling of fear-mongering shows how a nationalist, anti-immigrant vision has become international, sometimes with fatal consequences. And sometimes you catch them in time, too. But an excellent point about that. And another excellent point, I guess, in a response to it on Twitter, this from the New York Times story on the same lunatic Coast Guardsman. The court filings did not make clear how the authorities had learned about this guy's plans. The court documents noted, though, that in the last 2 years, quote, the defendant conducted online searches and made thousands of visits for pro-Russian, neo-fascist, and neo-Nazi literature. And just another little Russia link there. They seem to be very interested, for whatever reason, in making themselves a clearinghouse for that kind of ideology. And that makes it international. Can't really help you beyond that. All right. All right. Well, I'm going to skip the Washington Post article from which this screen cap was taken. I think that's the point has been made. And we'll jump back in our train of thought here to see if we can figure out, was there anything else that I really needed to add to this? This was the Nicholas Grossman tweets that Greg had sent me about Netanyahu, right? Just to close that loop out. Netanyahu was the first mover. He aligned himself with Otzma Yehudit, which the U.S., EU, and Israel have all labeled terrorists. Of what sort, we don't know. But next tweet in this chain here, in their own way, Remain versus Leave, the Brexit question, Clinton versus Trump, and Macron versus Le Pen, gave the UK, US, and France an opportunity to tell everyone who they are. Now, Israel gets the same chance, gets a chance to show everybody what they really are too. And, well, we'll have varying opinions among the audience about what Israel really is, and we'll have some data to go along with it pretty soon as well. And I guess really in the end, although I'm sure there are a lot of people that would like to be proved right, I think we would all rather that Israel change its directions and prove itself to be, at the minimum, a less horrible version of that which many who harbor rightful anger toward the government of Israel think, and maybe others who have a more optimistic view might become encouraged by the results of the election. I guess Netanyahu, it's a last-ditch effort, and if this one works, they've got serious problems. If this doesn't work, good, and they also have serious problems. But at least it will not have worked. That would be nice if we could have it come out that way. All right, let's see. Anything else that we want to see if we can shoehorn in here? I've pretty much ruined the show for any other topics, but it seemed like an important one to me, and I'm glad we looked into it as deeply as we did. I don't think you get this kind of discussion very often on anythings, really, honestly. 2 hours? All right, I know, I bored the hell out of you, but now you're an expert, or at least I feel better anyhow. Okay, let's see. There's definitely more out there. One thing I want to share, it's funny/tragic. What is this? NBC News report, as a follow-up to the news the other day, which probably struck you as, I wonder why he's doing that. That doesn't seem in character for Donald Trump, but hell, I'll take it. If you were surprised by the announcement that the Bush administration was going to undertake an international campaign to push for the decriminalization of homosexuality around the world, and that probably did grab your attention, right? And maybe even gave you a hopeful feeling. I'm not sure why they chose this, but I'm glad that they did. Well, don't get too excited, because apparently, according to Tim Fitzsimmons at NBC News and videotape that proves this to be true, a day after the highest profile openly gay person in the Trump administration revealed his push to decriminalize homosexuality around the world, and I guess it was his push and not Trump's, the president was caught on camera seemingly unaware of the effort. Richard Grenell, the U.S. ambassador to Germany, said Tuesday that he has total support from the administration for his gay rights program focusing on 71 countries where homosexuality is still illegal. But Wednesday, a reporter asked President Donald Trump in the Oval Office, Mr. President, on your push to decriminalize homosexuality, are you doing that and why? And Trump didn't understand what they were asking, and somehow his way of saying, could you repeat the question, is say it. What does that mean? I don't know. Say it again. He doesn't have the stamina to get the again out. So the question is repeated. Your push to decriminalize homosexuality across the world, the reporter repeated. Trump is like, I'm doing what with who now? And his response is, I don't know which report you're talking about. We have many reports. It's actually quite an interesting listen, but one, it's obvious. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm pushing to decriminalize homosexuality because I'm not doing that. That's the total support that Grenell said he had. And two, nobody said anything about reports, by the way, right? Your push to decriminalize homosexuality across the world. What are you doing that and why? Say, are you doing it or why? Okay, so, what about this thing? I don't know what report you're talking about. Oh, I'm not talking about a report. Well, we have many reports. And right there, just again, a dotard's answer to, I don't, even if you got it right, I'm not sure what issue you're talking about. We deal with a lot of issues. We have many reports, the best reports, beautiful reports. That I can tell you, believe me. And then he moves on. He just says, anybody else have any other questions? So that's how he dismisses the idea that the government is totally behind the idea of fighting to decriminalize homosexuality in every country around the world. So I bet you didn't have your hopes up about that one. But if you did, well, duh. What'd you do that for? Ditch that crap immediately. All right. Let's see. Other things that we might be able to shoehorn in before we exit. Here's a really wacky one. I don't know how this happened, and I don't know anything about it. What can I tell you? But this is a hell of a story. Where's the original one that I grabbed for this one? Probably not going to find that one. So I'll give you this one instead from ArizonaCentral.com. Grand Canyon tourists, were you one? Exposed for years to radiation in a museum building, safety manager says. Here's what happened, quickly enough. For nearly 2 decades at the Grand Canyon, tourists, employees, and children on tours, everybody on tours, passed by 3 paint buckets stored in the national park's museum collection building, unaware that they were being exposed to radiation. Now, why you would leave 3 paint buckets in the same place inside a museum for 20 years, I have no idea. Maybe it was in a broom closet or whatever, but it won't matter when you're talking about radiation. Although federal officials learned last year that the 5-gallon containers were brimming with uranium ore, then removed the radioactive specimens, the park's safety director alleges nothing was done to warn park workers or the public that they might have been exposed to unsafe levels of radiation. Apparently, a kid came in there, why I don't know, with a Geiger counter. Maybe I got a new Geiger counter and I take it with me everywhere to see what might be radioactive. I don't know. And it turns out the thing goes off at these buckets and they're like, what are these buckets? Anyway, oh, they're filled with uranium. How weird. And by the way, apparently you're not really supposed to be around raw uranium ore for more than, I don't know, a couple seconds, quite honestly. But, oops, I've got the wrong music here. There we go. That's our exit music. I almost forgot to set off. But Adults, it says, could have been exposed to dangerous doses in under 30 seconds. However, tour groups, often including children, sometimes spent 30 minutes or more near the taxidermy exhibit for demonstrations. That's where they were keeping paint buckets for 20 years. Talk about laziness. I don't know what's going on here. I love the full story, but whatever the full story is, they just left uranium sitting around there. Why it was there, I don't know. Why it wasn't sold off in the Uranium One scandal, I have no idea. Lots of stories we didn't get to today. I don't know why I felt that one absolutely needed to be put on your plate for the weekend. Maybe just because it was wacky. We're going to have to come back on Monday, back to the other radioactive material story, which we've covered in the past in this show, and we'll have to bring up again because everybody thinks it's a new story all over again. The plot to sell nuclear technology to the Saudis and maybe also to Qatar as well. There's a Qatar angle on all of this, which of course involves Donald Trump and his cronies being introduced to money men from across the Middle East by Trump himself in some cases. That may explode over the weekend. We hope the nuclear plants don't explode over the weekend. Hope nothing explodes near where you are over the weekend. And not in the next 5 minutes either, because if it does, then you'll miss out on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.
From
Next.
Daily Coast Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Justice has everything for you. There's another school teacher strike on the way or underway in West Virginia right now. The Republican tax bill helped U.S. banks rake in a record $28 billion in profits last year. And let's see, who even knows? Oh, Mitch McConnell in the news as well. That guy sucks. Stay tuned to find out exactly why.